So welcome everyone to this Thursday night talk at Mountain Cloud, March 11th, 2021. The month of March in the Northern Hemisphere tends to be a season of change. Spring arrives no matter the weather, and time springs forward in parts of the world that agree to that adjustment of the clock, a bow to the changing light and length of days. March includes everything. The full range of weather outside, known for its turbulence this time of year, at least here, and the weather inside, the tumult of human experience that can toss us about or bring us to a keener, clearer awareness of the moment at hand. This very moment, distinct, all-inclusive. One single tissue of constant change. Whole, complete, and absent anything fixed or enduring. What a wonder. Lately, I've been keeping company with two short poems. Poems that point uniquely, recognizably to the reality of this moment. The first is a poem by the American poet Jim Haba. Back in March 2010, Bill Moyers recorded the final installment of his acclaimed PBS series, The Bill Moyers Journal. In saying goodbye, he mentioned this as his favorite poem. It's called Yes to Blue. Yes to blue, after trying to separate green from yellow and hoping that everything will get simpler each time you bring an idea closer to the light, which is always changing, always being born day after day, year after year, again and again, now. The great affirmation, now. A single tissue of constant change. The second poem is from a haiku workshop sponsored by Upaya a few weeks ago. The poem, a haiku, is by Katie Egert. Icicle glistens, pointing her long fingers down at nothing at all. It was a winter weekend in Santa Fe when icicles were hanging low and long, slowly melting in the cold, sun-soaked days. Icicle glistens, pointing her long fingers down at nothing at all. Icicle glistening in its slow melt, pointing at nothing, pointing at herself, the puddle below. Hakuin's Song of Zazen begins like water and ice. Without water, no ice. Outside us, no Buddhas. Well, that's not the first line, but like water and ice, without water, no ice. Outside us, no Buddhas. And then the next line, how near the truth, yet how far we seek. Like one in water, crying, I thirst. Lately, those cries have been echoing out in the form of questions. Questions about grief and how to practice with strong emotions. Those came up in a big way at the last Mountain Cloud retreat. Questions about form and emptiness. Why two words, a seeming dyad, when the fundamental fabric of this reality, the fact of our life, is indivisible oneness, unconditional oneness. And questions about death, sometimes expressed as a sense of lack or missing, or a flaw so unforgiving it may call into question the value of life. Mugai Nyodai, the first woman Zen master in Japan, had something to say about these questions. We've been hearing from her lately. She wrote, "Zen is the heart of the one who asks, not someone else's words." Nyodai, or Chiono, whose awakening came when the bottom of the bucket breaking and everything falling through. Water, reflection of the moon, and every last bit of herself gone. Zen is the heart of the one who asks. What about grief? What about the heart of the Heart Sutra? Form is emptiness. What about this aching sense of lack, and on its heels, the ultimate sense of lack or loss we call death? So, of course, there's no way to speak to all of this in one talk, except to say that one glimpse of who we truly are speaks to all of it. Like yes to blue, or the transparent glistening of an icicle pointing down to the small puddle of melt that is nothing at all, and at the same time itself. So how can we get a glimpse into the heart of the matter, the true human heart? How can we release our grip, empty our hands, and surrender to the intimacy of things just as they are? The intimacy of not knowing, the space of the unconditioned. Can we allow the door to our heart to fall open, wide open, such that the whole world falls in? Last Thursday, Bill Bruce gave the Dharma talk. It struck a chord. Bill turned the lens of this practice on our climate, the tenuous ecology of this animal planet, what he called the full planetary catastrophe we are not just facing, but causing. He read from David Abram's book, Becoming Animal, evoking what Abram calls the deep human entanglement with nature, the elemental kinship between the human body and the breathing earth. In one particularly striking passage, Abram describes the fluidity of every part of our being with every part of the earth And he suggests a more fitting and true spelling for this planet. Eairth. Earth. As Bill explained, the I, that little I, me, mine that we tend to install at the center of our experience, is relocated to its native home, wholly immersed in the fluid element of air. That's how Abram put it. Bill went on to speak about the three refuges, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and the precepts, formal commitments of this practice that dispose us toward the world. He named the urgency of the matter at hand and then ended his talk with a scene you won't forget if you heard it. In case you haven't heard it, the talk is now posted on Mountain Cloud's YouTube page. Bill's last word dropped into the opening of one great human pause was a question. What is going on? At the time, listening, I actually heard the question as Master Seppo put it. I thought that's what Bill said. What is this? Seppo was Unman's teacher. Unman, the master in the koan Bill took up. The phrases elemental kinship and great fluidity come to mind. What is going on? What is this? So tonight, out of this kinship and fluidity and a bit of surprise, I'd like to revisit Unman's koan. Of course, fresh every time and with appreciation for the ongoing momentum. So here, with a bow, is case 16 of the Gateless Gate, the sound of the bell and the 7-panel rope. Unman said, the world is vast and wide like this. Why do we put on our 7-panel robe at the sound of the bell? Unman addresses his monks, addresses us with a statement and with what appears to be a question. Keep in mind, this is a koan, so it's about you, pointing directly to who you are. The world is vast and wide like this. Why do we put on our 7-panel robe at the sound of the bell? So this teaching speaks to the morning ritual at monasteries. At the appointed hour, which would be quite early, the temple bell is rung. Hearing it, the monks put on their robes made from sewn together remnants of cloth. Bill wore his raksu. The monks dress and go to the main hall for the morning ceremony. The bell sounds, monks put on their robes. The first time I worked with this koan, something shifted. that has remained. It shifted in my ordinary experience of turning off the alarm in the morning. Rather than that, waking into a momentary ugh before silencing the alarm. It was just turning off. Alarm sounds, turning off. Listening to Bill, I couldn't help but note the leap into the real wake-up call he presented, the full catastrophe. What if we were to respond to that seamlessly, without a moment's pause? The bell rings. Rise and go to the mat. If you've ever been to a Zen retreat, and most here have, you may have a sense of how immediate this can be. Entrust yourself to the schedule is an opening instruction. As the days go on, full days of practice, less and less of a gap, nothing extra. The schedule takes care of itself. The world is vast and wide like this. It's also possible to get a sense of the vast boundlessness in our own sitting, timeless, spacious, no one doing anything. It's possible to get a taste of that right now. The empty, infinite dynamism right here. Where else could it be? The world is vast and wide like this. Unman adds the question we are all the time asking: why? Why do I resist the very thing I want to do? Why am I tossed about by thoughts and emotions when I'm sitting here inviting stillness? Why all the suffering, the pain in my own life, the lack, the loss, the grief, and the pain of the whole world? Why? What have I done? What can I do? How often our why is a way of avoidance. Let's just think about this, figure it. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard had an aphorism that winked in the direction of this endless diversion. This is a paraphrase. If we just think about the problems of the world hard enough, everything will be resolved by next Tuesday. Kierkegaard also wrote, life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. Why do we put on our 7-panel robe at the sound of the bell? Yamada Konroshi comments, this why. It is the wonderful charm, the magical talisman that brings a Zen student to realization. This why is the miraculous means of putting away the why of reasoning with all its thoughts and ideas. And to pursue the why, you must surpass the why. What might it mean to surpass the why? to drop all reasoning. When Yamada Kon experienced the deep awakening that is so well documented, he exclaimed, "There is no reasoning at all." To drop the obfuscation of thinking we can know and thereby control. To drop the sense of lack that blinds us to who we truly are. To drop into the world just as it is, without the slightest gap. Vast and wide like this. Unman's koan so directly conveys the world of form and emptiness. These are not two. Despite the trick of language, the use of a dyad to say one, one, one. Putting on the robe is nothing but vast and wide. The robe itself is vast and wide. Just one corner of it, boundless, complete. There is no other emptiness than this. Norman Fisher has a recent essay called Beautiful Snowflakes, where he speaks to emptiness, beginning with his own early experience. I think this was in the latest issue of Lion's Roar. He writes, "From the first time I encountered the word in English, I liked the sound of it, emptiness. Some would find it chillingly abstract, even scary, but I took to it immediately. I chanted the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness form, alone and with the Sangha every day for years, before I ever bothered to find out what the great teachers of the past meant by emptiness. No question of why." He writes, "It didn't matter to me what they meant. I knew what emptiness was." This week, a longtime student at Mountain Cloud reminisced about chanting. Shiki sokoze ku, ku sokoze shiki. This circle of sound, doing what it says. Form is nothing but emptiness. Emptiness, nothing but form. Fisher offers this impression. I remember once at the beginning of my practice, wandering in the woods during a blizzard, drifting snow piled 2 feet high, chanting the Heart Sutra over and over again. In the snow, with trees, bushes, and ground covered in white, 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 and the sky white with whiteness falling down, the sutra's meaning was perfectly clear. He goes on, traditionally, emptiness refers to the fact that phenomena have no intrinsic existence. This means not that phenomena don't exist, but that they don't exist as we think they do, as freestanding, independent, solidly real entities. This, he writes, is as true of us as it is of the world around us. Everything is contingent, not solid, ceasing the moment it arises, moment after moment. Actually, arising already gone. As Ryan Roshi says, it exists in a way that it does not exist. That's what this is. This. this. Fisher writes, we of course don't know this. We are deeply ignorant of the one thing we should not be ignorant of, the real nature of ourselves and the world we live in. Ignorance, unfortunately, doesn't mean we don't know, he adds. It would be better if we didn't know. Ignorance means we know something very firmly, but it is the wrong thing. We know that things are solid and independent and intrinsically existent, but they actually are not. So ignorance is not knowing. Ignorance is a form of knowing, but it is a misknowing. Fisher goes on to describe this practice as the process of coming to see our misknowledge and letting it go, to begin to experience, accept, and live the truth about how we and the world actually are. What happens then when we empty our hands, open our hearts, drop the pretense of knowing how things should be or even how they are? What happens when we surrender to the intimacy that allows things to speak for themselves? Just one more bit of this essay. Earlier, Fisher describes wisdom, this emptiness and compassion, like the wings of a great bird. He writes, holding both in balance against the wafting winds allows you to float, enjoying the day. Really, though, the two wings are one wing, where you can appreciate the flavor of emptiness on the tongue. You know immediately that love is the only way, and that everything is love and nothing but love. And finally, Fisher writes, all problems, all joys, all living and all dying, it's love. The world is vast and wide, like this. Like this. After Bill's talk, I started reading David Abram. Abram's first book, since republished in a 20th anniversary edition, is called The Spell of the Sensuous. He begins the book with an epigraph from Gary Snyder. Short poem. As the cricket's soft autumn hum is to us, so are we to the trees, as are they to the rocks and the hills. Shiki shiki seku. Then Abram sets the scene from his own experience. He writes, late one evening, I stepped out of my little hut in the rice paddies of eastern Bali and found myself falling through space. Over my head, the black sky was rippling with stars, densely clustered in some regions, almost blocking out the darkness between them, and more loosely scattered in other areas, pulsing and beckoning to each other. Behind them all streamed the great river of light with its several tributaries. Yet the Milky Way churned beneath me as well, for my hut was set in the middle of a large patchwork of rice paddies, separated from each other by narrow 2-foot-high dikes, and these paddies were all filled with water. Giano's bucket suddenly comes to mind. He writes, the surface of these pools by day reflected perfectly the blue sky, a reflection broken only by the thin, bright green tips of new rice. But by night, the stars themselves glimmered from the surface of the paddies, and the river of light whirled through the darkness underfoot as well as above. There seemed no ground in front of my feet, only the abyss of star-studded space, falling away forever. He goes on. I was no longer simply beneath the night sky, but also above it. The immediate impression was of weightlessness. I might have been able to reorient myself, to regain some sense of ground and gravity, were it not for a fact that confounded my senses entirely. Between the constellations below and the constellations above drifted countless fireflies, their lights flickering like the stars, some drifting up to join the clusters of stars overhead, others like graceful meteors slipping down from above to join the constellations underfoot. And all these paths of light, upward and downward, were mirrored as well in the still surface of the paddies. I felt myself at times falling through space, at other moments floating and drifting. I simply could not dispel the profound vertigo and giddiness. The paths of the fireflies and the reflections in the water's surface held me in a sustained trance. Even after I crawled back to my hut and shut the door on this whirling world, I felt that now the little room in which I lay was itself floating free of the earth. No wonder Abram is focusing his considerable gifts on subverting the distance between our human bodiliness and the uncompromisingly interconnected biosphere that breathes us. No wonder he's calling us to alter the way we see. Vast and wide, like this. Earlier today, wondering about the pieces of this talk, I opened the miscellaneous koans to 2 lines. They're attributed to Sozan, co-founder of the Soto school, a near contemporary of Unman, in a different line. Suddenly opening this little booklet to those 2 lines, it seemed like a call and response between these 2 masters. The world is vast and wide like this. Why do we put on our 7-panel robe at the sound of the bell? And here are the lines from Sozan. 1,000 mountains are covered with snow. Why is one peak not white? This empty, infinite world, the vast vista, nothing at all. And yet, here we are, unique and unrepeatable. Each species, each person, each moment, no other emptiness than this. So I started this talk with Haba's poem, Yes to Blue. and that long glistening finger of an icicle pointing to the melt on the ground, pointing to itself. Here, to end, is Mumon's verse to this case 16. He writes, with realization, all things are of one family. Without realization, everything is separate and different. Without realization, all things are of one family. With realization, everything is separate and different. The reality of this world is there's just one world. All things, one family, one existence, one infinite, dynamic body, your true body. When we don't see, it's as if the living lines are cut. We're cut off from one another. Everything is separate and different. Then Mumon turns the fulcrum. Without realization, all things are of one family. Not realizing who we truly are, not seeing, we miss the wild variety, the great array of specificity. Each thing so distinct, each one. With realization, everything is separate and different. Open our eyes, and each bit of life, each bit, is of immeasurable value. Distinct, complete in itself, the full expression. So let's take care of it and continue our practice. Thank you so much for listening.